Well, hello there, and welcome to this video. Thanks for checking in. My name is Matt Petrowski, and in this video, we're continuing with our series about data structure, and we're learning about self-relationships because that's what we need for our time tracking database. Stick with me. We'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so what do we have for today? Well, we're continuing with our database and we are working on our time tracking database. Now, if you just happen to find this video via a YouTube search or something and you're interested in the series, following these along because we're right in the middle of something, click on the channel icon, which will be the logo for my channel, ISO. That'll take you to the channel page and then you'll be able to see all of the different playlists and you'll be able to check right in. If you're interested in following along with the file that I use, then down in the comment section, or excuse me, in the description, I have a link to the file in case you don't want to build things as we go. So let's take a look at what we've been doing here. We'll do a little bit of a recap from the previous lesson, which we just took a look at. Now, we've been comparing and contrasting two different database approaches here with regards to data structure. FileMaker has this file called timekeeping. I'm using a copy of FileMaker 16, and I am also using a copy of FileMaker Pro Advanced. In fact, if you're a FileMaker learner, I highly suggest FileMaker Pro Advanced because you're able to use these tools right here, the data viewer and the debugger. Immensely useful when you are learning and working in FileMaker. Plus, I show the use of custom functions, and those really aren't available unless you have the advanced copy of FileMaker. Now, you can, if you want to get a copy of the time billing along with the database that I have, you can choose this option of Get Started, actually right here. And when that comes up, you can scroll down. Again, I'm in FileMaker 16, and I scroll really fast there, but you're looking for this right here, Explore the Possibilities, See Advanced Solutions. And when you click on that, you'll be able to access time billing right there if you want to just compare and contrast. Sometimes I'll reference that database, sometimes I won't. So what we're doing is we have created a very simple system. We've took a different approach. FileMaker took the approach where each time billing was a record that stores two different pieces of information, a start time and an end time. And in a couple videos ago, I explained that breaking your data down into its smallest unit, I call it the atomic unit of whatever it is you're trying to track. In this case, it's just a timestamp or a value. I chose to put not both values, start and end, on the same record, but within different records, within each of their own records. But what this did is it created a situation where I now have to link records together in order to group them into a common collection. Now, of course, we're going to be doing that based on a project ID. And when we set up this database, we don't even have the project table yet created, and we're still not going to create it quite yet, but we did create a common key across multiple individual timestamps. So here what we have is we decided we're going to have just a record. I decided not to have an extra timestamp field. I'm just going to use the creation timestamp field because it's already there. And we're just identifying by categorizing each of the individual records. Is this a start time or is it an end time? Because it really doesn't matter what you have. You have a start time and an end time of a period that you work, and you also have a start time and an end time of a period that maybe you take a break, even within that time frame of starting work and ending work. You may have multiple breaks within that. So this database is going to allow us to track those individual items and then extract the data out. So just before we actually link these records together, because we're going to be doing that based on this close button, because what we have is we have a situation in our database right now where we've basically sort of left things open. We've got this nice little system where we have a start button and we have a close button, or it could be a finish button, and both of these are creating a new record. And that new record that closes a given start record needs to have the type of a 1. We decided yesterday that we're going to store numbers. It's a Boolean value. It's either a start or a finish, true or false. So the start is 0, the end is 1. But once we have both of these records created, this close button should no longer show. I should no longer be able to close this particular start time record. So that requires that we create a self relationship. But let's do something fun just before that. One of the things that you can do in FileMaker is it has these things known as formatters. So I've always been saying this throughout this series. No matter how you choose to structure your data, how you display your data can be completely different than how you structure your data. And this is where a lot of new FileMaker learners sort of get tripped up, because they'll put in a text field and then they'll actually use the words open versus close. And while that's completely okay to do in most situations, in a much larger database system that grows and becomes much more complex, numbers are always faster, and I keep saying this. Well, if I want to represent this number that we have on screen right here, the type as either open or closed, FileMaker does give us the ability to do that. Let's take a look at where. When we go into layout mode here on this file, I want you to select the type field if you're following along, and we're going to go over to the Inspector tab. Now, in the fourth area of the Inspector tab, the Data tab, as I close down some of these so that we can focus on the one that we're interested in, FileMaker has this data formatting. Now, we took a look at this in a previous video, I think maybe only once, but I want you to recognize that every type of field on a FileMaker layout has the ability to specify some type of formatting. So here we have general, as entered, Boolean, decimal, currency, and percent. Now, obviously, these are going to deal with numbers, but we have this one particular item called Boolean. So when we select this for this particular number field, which we know is a 1 or a 0, notice what I have in here, show non-zeros as, and I've got more, and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, yours in this database probably says the same because I was already playing around before today's lesson. It may say something like this. So notice that because of that change, I can actually put words in here for whatever I want. But the reason that I had the 1, 2, 3, 4 in there, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is watch what happens when I get up to 7 and I go to 8, 9, and then I tab. Unfortunately, FileMaker limits us to only 7 characters within the display of this formatting for this field. So, non-zeros for me are going to be open records or start records, and excuse me, the other way around. Show zeros as open and show non-zeros as closed. So basically all we're doing, we're saying, FileMaker, we want you to use the number, but we're going to take the opportunity to use this formatter to format the display of the data to be whatever I want. So awesome. We go into browse mode, and now guess what we've got? We have our display of open versus closed. And we'll be able to take off this label, and this will not be actually an accessible field. So this is something that I do right from the get-go. Whenever I know that the user is never going to interact with a field, I take the opportunity to make that a merge field or a merge value. Now, why would I do that? Well, FileMaker, a lot of its example databases and a lot of examples out there that you'll see on the internet, YouTube here, etc., they will say, just put the field on the layout, because that's what most people are used to doing. I make a very clear distinction when I have things on my interface of whether they are user interactive or not. This particular field is not something the user is going to be going into. I don't ever want them to be able to search on it. It is purely for me, for the functionality of my database. So I get rid of it. I completely get rid of that type. Now, what am I going to do? Well, I could go all the way up here and choose the text tool, but I already have text on my layout, so I always like to just option drag. And I'm going to double click right here, and I'm going to use a shortcut of Command Option In. But if you're interested, the feature is right up here under the Insert menu, and I know I'm probably covering this right now, so let me zoom over here and see if I can, there we go. This is the option that I'm looking for right here, Merge Field. So, if you haven't seen this in one of the previous videos, all fields that you have in all of your tables, related or not, can be accessed by putting them on the layout as text instead of the actual field. Fields can be searched, fields can be entered into. You can limit or control whether you can go into those fields or not, but no matter what, a merge field is just for the purpose of display. So any data that I'm going to display, I convert that field into the display value. Now, as soon as I convert that particular object, I have to remember that the setting that I was making on the field of changing it to open versus closed was on the field. It's not on this object. So I need to go back to that setting. And you can see right here that for this object, it was not changed to the same thing that I had set for the field. Exactly what I just stated. So we need to make this one Boolean, and we need to show our non-zeros as closed and our zeros as open. So this is getting closer to what I want as an ideal. And I'll just move that right there, close that, and I'll be able to change it to whatever size I want and display it however I need. Boom, there we go, open versus close records. All right, so let's solve our problem. Our problem is this close should actually go away, and we need to create a script in order to make that happen. In order to make, the script's not going to do it, but in order for the close to be able to go away, we need any given record that is created to be able to see its partner record, or its partner plus other records. So what we've got in this database is we have a situation where each record is containing only one given timestamp, and we need to make it see something in common. Now we do have this project ID that's in common, but let's think about this. This is always what you do with FileMaker systems. Whenever you're designing, before you just go in and implement, you always you ask as many questions as you can. In a given work session, let's say that starts at 8 o'clock and ends at 5 o'clock, do I want the possibility of being able to track how many times a person takes a break within that span of time? Yes. Okay, if I do want to do that, do I apply that break as just its own ad hoc individual item, or should I apply that break as part of what happened during that given project session? And that usually is the case. So in that scenario, what I might end up having now is more than just two records, more than just a start time and an end time. I might have a start time, another start time, a close time, and then another close time. And that's something that I'm going to have to manage. I have to now, because of the structure that I've chosen to use, I am going to have to put that into this database. I have to build all of that functionality. Now, I will grant you that's a little bit more effort, but it's for greater flexibility down the road. Whereas over here in FileMaker's database, it's minimal effort. It's like make my start time, make my end time. But you're not going to be able to get as creative with the data in that structure. So what we need to do is we need to create a self-relationship. And let's do that. Going to our relationships, which we don't have any actually yet. We're working off of this table occurrence currently. I've held down the Option key in order to drag this. Probably what's better at this stage, according to my naming conventions, I tend to do this. I will name this actually what the particular table occurrence is actually used for according to what it even is in FileMaker. So I'll actually call this layout double chevron time, because that's exactly what it is, and it makes it very clear and obvious when I'm selecting from table occurrences. And then I will actually leave this one just named time, or what I tend to do is make my developer tables. Again, I'm going to refer you to the developer tables video that I shot earlier in a previous series where we talked about fields and calculations. All right, so the reason that I did, rather than using this one versus this one, do you know why? Well, the reason is FileMaker, the layout is already tied to this table occurrence. And so I knew that, so I renamed this one, and then I put the other one over here. Rather than naming the one that the duplicate I had created, I think you get the point. Because if I zoom out and say, okay, now, yep, that's in fact what is the case. I wanted the table occurrence that was already associated to my layout. I didn't want to have to go create a new layout or reassign the table occurrence. It was just easier to do it there in the graph. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so we need our relationship. And the relationship is going to basically work like this. It is a parent-to-child relationship, but it's actually the beginnings of what you find as one of the more common structures in a lot of database systems. But it's really elusive to a lot of new FileMaker learners, and it's a hierarchy. And a hierarchy always starts with the Genesis record. And the Genesis record is basically the first record that's created within a hierarchy of series. It's sort of like going all the way back to Adam and Eve. Adam was the first. he didn't have any genetics that came from anything else. And then you had, his offspring and then their offspring and their offspring. So the Genesis record, the first record that you create, can then spawn to any other child record. And of course, the child of that parent can become a parent and then have another child record and then another child record. And that's how you create a hierarchy. So in this regard, that's what we're actually doing. We are going to say the start time is the Genesis, and then it's going to have a child record, and we need to tie them together. So the way that we're going to do that is just through one field. It turns out that in this situation, the one field is going to be in the same table. So I know this sounds terrible, but this database, this particular table is sort of incestuous here. That's really bad. But the parent and child relationship is within the same table. It's not from one table to another table. So in this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a field called ID parent, because any record can potentially be a child of the parent. The parent is just going to be in the same table. And you'll see how this works. So let's go ahead and create this record, and let's wire them up. So in our time table, in the same database, or the same table, we're going to have a self relationship to itself, where we're going to relate the ID to the parent ID, so that we can look through that relationship to see whether or not the full cycle has been completed. The full cycle being the start and the end record of a particular connection. So let's wire that up. Go to our relationships. We now need a copy of the exact same table, and we're simply going to link the ID field to, this is a trick if you don't know this. When FileMaker's table occurrences, this is the collapse state. FileMaker's got 3. This is it doesn't have any keys connected, so it's not showing the second state of the 3, the keys only state. It's showing the all fields. Now, I've shown you in previous videos, I just do an arbitrary drag, typically, in order to establish a relationship, and then double click. But here's another tip for you. If you don't want to do that, as I delete this, this little arrow does allow you to scroll down here. You see that it comes active on both of these. If you don't want to actually click and scroll, you can drag. I don't know if it should work the same on Windows, but notice that if I hover over the arrow, FileMaker actually moves it for me. So if you are in that state and you don't want to have to double click the relationship to go in and the arrow is exposed, go ahead and hover over the exposed arrow, and then you can just drag until the field appears. Now, if you have anything more than 100 fields or so, that's really a bit of a pain to do. So it's much easier to just do the arbitrary drag and then reassign. All right, so we now have our very simple connection of a hierarchy, where in this same table, via a self relationship, one record can relate to another record. And remember, FileMaker's relationships are bidirectional. If this particular table occurrence can see into this particular table occurrence, then we can do the reverse as well. That means that the closed record is going to be able to see its parent record when we actually create that record. So let's go do that. The way that this is going to work now, and we're going to make this really simple. In fact, I suggest you do the same, is get rid of your all of your records except for one open record. That's our goal, is to keep things simple so that we can really understand what's going on. So what needs to happen now? We already have the close button showing, and it's only going to show when the record is an open record. And we know that open, even though it's a text word displayed here, it's being stored as a 0 or a 1. A 0 is our start. So there's 2 things that need to happen on our close. Can you guess what they are? When a user clicks close, what do we want to have happen? This is the test part of learning FileMaker. We want to obviously create a new record. We want to make that record have the closed state, and we want to take the genetics along to the other record. What are the genetics? Well, it's the ID. We want to give this primary ID as a foreign key into the ID parent. Now, granted, if you're following my conventions, ID parent, if I had a parent table, then I would have to come up with a different naming for this. But typically in a hierarchical structure, ID parent just immediately says to me, okay, this is a self relationship. And of course, looking at the relationship graph will indicate that as well, because the last value in the name of the table occurrence will be the base table. So I will see that time is connected to time. So let's do that close script. We'll go into our defined scripts, and we are creating our first script that actually does something aside from our startup. Close, let's call it session for right now. All right, we know that the close button only exists on an open record, and we're going to want it to disappear when we know that a full cycle has been completed, and that's what we're solving. So we need to do a few things. The first thing is, before we leave this record by creating a new record, because what happens is if we put in a new record request right now, that means we will have jumped off of our start record and jumped to the new record. We just lost access to our data. So we need to, before we leave that record, capture anything that we want to take along. So I'm going to create a set variable step, and I'm going to move that up. And what am I going to capture? Well, it's just the ID. So I'm just going to call this ID. When I tab, FileMaker will automatically add the $sign for a local variable. What is it that I want to take? Well, I want to take just the ID field. The ID field is going to be the parent ID, which is going to be put into the ID parent. Why do I have two of them there? Interesting. Did I create two? I don't know. We'll have to take a look. All right, so we have there we go. We've got what we want. So we have set an ID field to capture the parent ID. We create our new record request, which is going to be our close. And now what we need to do is those two things. We need to set our ID into the parent, and we also need to change the record type. It's not an open event. Remember, our auto enter on our type is defaulting to any new record that's created is considered an open record. So we now have to tell this record you're going to be a close record. So we're going to use a set field, and we're going to set the field of the type. It will have already been auto-entered and be a 0, and at this time we want to basically set it to 1. Now here's something that I tend to do. In FileMaker Standards, FileMaker has the ability for us to use the values of true versus false. In a lot of programming, that tends to make a little bit more sense, where it's a little bit more difficult to determine sometimes whether a 1 or 0 is representing true or false when you might have other things going on around it with regards to math and logic. So I just tend to use true and false. But whether you use 1 or 0, true or false, it's no difference to FileMaker, but it's a difference to you in terms of the readability of your code. All right, so we have set the field to true. There's only one other set field we need to do. We need to set that field that we created, our ID parent. That's what I got confused. I'm sitting here talking so fast, I saw ID project and ID parent, and I thought they were the same. Excuse me for that little mistake right there. Very easy to obviously get confused. So what are we going to set field to? Well, we're simply going to set it to the variable that we had set right up here. So I'm going to set the ID parent to the ID. And that's pretty much it. That's all that I can think of, at least off the top of my head, since I am doing this real time and live, that we are going to need, and then we can solve our problem. So let's see what happens. We have got the close button, and it is showing because of the status. If it was a close status, a 1, then the hide calculation will take care of hiding it. So we will click close, and we get our close button. Oh, what did I not do? I forgot to actually attach the script to the button. All right, let's go into layout mode and let's actually attach our script. Very common in terms of what you might be doing is you might actually forget to actually do this by setting the perform script to the actual button that you want. And so that's a key important thing with FileMaker with regards to what's going on. And let's make sure, because see what happened is that record that got created is still an open record because it still was just a create a new record. So let's get rid of that one. I'm doing it with Command or Control E to delete the record. And now let's click close and see what happens. Boom, there we go. Okay, we've got our solution now. These two records are now tied through our relationship where this one does not need an ID parent because it is the parent. This record is the child and it has the ID of the parent, 10D5. 10D5 right there. Perfect. So now all we have to do is the final piece of the equation. Remember what I said is that in defined database, FileMaker's relationships are bidirectional. So while from this context we can see quite clearly that FileMaker considers this a one-to-many relationship, meaning any open can have multiple closes, but we don't actually want it to. We can look from this context back through the relationship in order to determine whether the cycle has been closed. We have an open and we have a close, and that's what we're going to do because we don't want to be able to close this particular event. We just already closed it. So let's go modify our hide calculation that actually determines whether or not this is closed. Well, we're actually going from the this isn't a reverse relationship in terms of how we're using it. This is actually a parent looking at the child relationship. So, I'm probably confusing you a little bit. It's good to know that it's bidirectional, but the context in which our hide calculation is being evaluated is it's still looking from the parent into the child. But if I was on the child would be able to look back into the parent. Just a key takeaway. All right, so let's fix it. We are going to go to our close button. We've got our hide calculation already on there, and there is our inspector that I just brought up. Let's close that one. Let's go to our behavior. We're looking at our hide object when, and currently our first condition upon which we want to hide this button is we never want to show the close button on an open record. So that's what it's saying right there. It's doing it with very basic Boolean logic. Obviously, if this is a positive value, meaning a close, then we want to hide it. Now we're going to add another condition, or. So it's going to be either this or it's going to be this. There's two different things that we want to account for. So what we need to do is we need to look, we're on the parent record, and we need to look into this self relationship, looking at, and you can always go to your managed database and check it out. Okay, I'm going from layout time to layout time 2. I should have renamed that, but I didn't. But we'll just select it. So layout time 2. So from me as a parent record, I want to look at my child record and basically just determine whether or not I have been set. How would you determine if it's been set? Well, we know that the ID parent field, which took the ID from the primary record, it's either going to have a value or it's not. So the easiest function to use on this is empty. And we're going to switch the logic here pretty quick so that it reads well. What is it? We've switched our table occurrence, so we're looking into the self relationship, looking at the child, and we want to look at the ID parent. So let's read the logic and see if we got it right. So we want to hide this close button if the layout type is true, meaning 1, meaning a close. Correct. I don't need to show a close button on a closed record. Or I want to hide if the ID parent is empty. Nope, that's not correct. I want to hide it if the ID parent is not empty, because I'm looking at the child record. Because I'm looking at the child record going through the relationship, I have to flip the logic, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. So this right here should actually mean that now this close button is going to hide if it's a close record, and it's going to hide if on the open record, if the loop has been closed. We have the open and the close. All right, so let's see if that's actually going to be the case. and if our logic works. Ta-da! It does. That's exactly what we want to have happen. We have now limited the user from being able to accidentally close the primary record. And let's try it out. We click Start. We just opened our session. We've captured the timestamp. We know that that's our unit right there. Time happens. Let's actually backdate this a little bit. We'll go to 11:20. So we go backdate this and some time has happened. Okay, I've got an appointment. I'm going to click Close. I click Close. My new event is actually created. The only thing that didn't happen, we saw right there, is the close button didn't automatically disappear. How do we solve that? Really easy. Let's go over to our script and let's just add one step. What happens is FileMaker, when you create a new record and you end up in a field, which is where I'm left off with this step right here, FileMaker sort of, okay, I'm ready for you to continue to do things. It hasn't really wrapped things up. When you wrap things up in FileMaker, it's actually called a commit. So we commit the record request. We can turn the dialog off if we want in this case because we're the developer. We can force it. Many times when you're writing your scripts, you want to take control over the process. But we have a very simple 5-step process right here, and it should do exactly what we want. So I'm going to get rid of everything here in my records. I am forcibly deleting those. I did that with a command Option E in order to delete them really quickly without seeing the dialog box so that I can just sit here and test my process. All right, so let's backdate this one. Not backdate it, back time it. So right there. So cool. I want to click Close, and I want this to automatically create the other record, have them be tied together via a self relationship, and no longer show the close button. There we go. We just got the result that we want to have happen. And again, remember, when we get into cleaning up this database, none of these key values are going to be seen. These are all going to be hidden completely behind the scenes. Everything we're doing right now is data structure. But we've achieved our solution. We are now capturing a start and an end time, and we're actually able to do those. What would it look like if we were doing multiple time stamps? Well, let's say we start our event, and then this becomes an issue now. Remember, at the beginning of this lesson, I started to say, well, what if we wanted to track times where we're going to allow the user to take a break? Well, this is now just a user interface issue. I don't have to actually close this session. All I have to do is if I wanted to click another start, that other start is just going to be the start of my pause. So this is more of a user interface issue, not a data structural issue, because there's nothing that prevents me from actually making a copy of this button or putting a button tied to a completely different type of script that says pause. So all I'm doing is I'm conveying through the user interface a different way of doing the exact same thing that the user probably isn't going to think to do. A user's not going to think in this database, oh, I need to start my work session. As a manager, I want you to also track when you take breaks. Just click the start button again. That doesn't make sense. But in the user interface, if we put a pause button and the pause button just does the same thing as the start button, we've solved the problem because that makes sense to the user interface. So again, the way that you structure your data and the way that you display the data and the way that the user interacts with the data can be completely separate things than what you may be thinking. And so now with these two close events, this one could have been, I could have put a label on here that this was a break. I could have hidden this one so that the user no longer saw it and they weren't confused. Again, these are all things that you do with the automation of your database. I close my break and then I close my session, and I now have captured timestamps in sequence where the first one is my opening session. I start my work. The next one is the start of a break, and the next one is the stop of that break, and then finally I close my session. And I'm able to extract the duration, and all of that data is collected for me. And if I want to find out all of the times that I took a break within a given work session, I'm going to be able to extract this data. And this is where we get the power by going down to the smallest unit of just the timestamp and programming our interface around it. So that's going to give me a wrap for the content for this particular lesson today. Let's see if anybody came up with any questions throughout the course of this. This is the time to actually think about those questions if you want to put them in. I know there's a little bit of a lag between the time that you see or what I'm actually recording and when it comes out. We'll switch over and take a look at those. If we've got no questions, then we've got a nice quick video today, and we'll probably call it a wrap. All right. Lee, HBH Group, my regulars, they're here. Eric, hey, everyone. All right. Thank you for the compliment. Never thought of displaying a Boolean info other than a text box. Yeah, we're actually trying to get the developers to expand it to more characters for us. More than 7 would be absolutely wonderful for being able to do that. But remember, you're always able to display data differently than how you actually store it. It's always possible. Can I show the script? Again, yes, I can. Let's switch back over here and put that on screen, and we'll get you a nice little zoom in there so that that can be on screen before we wrap things up. Super simple script today. Basically, we're just taking data from one record and we're putting it onto the other record, and it's because of the relationship, the self relationship, we have tied those records together. And remember, one of the other things that we're going to put into this is we're going to tie multiple of these records together in common based on their one common attribute is whatever project or whatever task is being worked on that can be applied across all of the records. So there you go. All right, hopefully that was long enough. And of course, you'll be getting a copy of this file as it's updated on the next lesson. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want everyone to be able to work along with me as I do the video and actually build on the file the same way that I am. It's one of the best ways to learn is to do things, play around, and figure out how you can make FileMaker do what you want it to do. All right, I think that's going to give us a wrap for today. So thank you for checking into this video. Of course, check out more content over at FileMakerMagazine.com. You can subscribe here on YouTube to be notified. Click the little bell icon as well, and the video that will be coming up next in this series will be coming up right there. So until I see you next time, much luck with your own FileMaker development, and happy file making. Bye-bye.